Do you remember the last time you cried? Not the kind of crying alone in your room, but the worst kind. Crying right when you're not allowed to cry. Maybe it
Think about the last time you cried in front of someone, not privately, alone in a quiet room, but in a moment where you desperately didn't want to. Maybe it was in the middle of a disagreement, or sitting in a doctor's office, or simply watching a film that caught you completely off guard. Your mind was telling you to hold it together. Your body had entirely different plans. The throat tightened, the eyes burned, and before you could stop it, the tears were already there. And then came the shame, that familiar, suffocating wave of embarrassment, the apology that tumbled out automatically. "I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm crying," as though the tears themselves were a personal failure, proof of some fundamental weakness in your character. But here's what no one ever told you, and what science has been quietly confirming for decades. The people who cry most easily are not the most fragile people in the room. In many ways, they are the most sophisticated. Their nervous systems are doing something extraordinary, something the people sitting stone-faced beside them are actually incapable of doing. Today we are going to explore the genuine psychology behind crying easily, what it reveals about your brain, your body, your emotional intelligence, and why everything society taught you about tears is almost entirely wrong. Let's begin with a question that almost nobody thinks to ask. Why do humans cry from emotion in the first place? Every other biological function in the human body exists because it served a survival advantage somewhere in our evolutionary history. Sweat cools us down. Pain warns us away from danger. Even laughter has documented social bonding functions. Nature, as a general rule, does not keep things around that serve no purpose. Emotional crying is unique to humans. While other animals produce tears to protect the surface of the eye, no other species has been confirmed to shed tears as a response to psychological or emotional states. This means that somewhere in our long evolutionary journey, the capacity for emotional tears was selected for. It survived because it helped people live, connect, and thrive. Evolutionary anthropologists have proposed that emotional tears function as a social signal, a visible, honest display of vulnerability and need that communicates distress to others in a way that words often cannot. In early human communities, where survival depended on group cooperation, the ability to signal distress and receive care in return was not weakness. It was one of the most essential social tools our species possessed. The people who could express need and inspire empathy in others were more likely to receive help, build alliances, and survive. So before we go any further, understand this. If you cry easily, you are not carrying a defect. You are carrying a trait that has been woven into human biology across hundreds of thousands of years because it works. Most people assume that tears are just water, a simple, somewhat embarrassing overflow of the eye. The biochemistry tells a far more interesting story. Biochemist Dr. William Frey conducted landmark research in the 1980s at the Ramsey Medical Center in Minnesota, collecting and analyzing human tears across different contexts. What he discovered fundamentally changed how scientists think about emotional crying. Emotional tears, the kind produced during grief, stress, or deep feeling, have a measurably different chemical composition from the tears your eyes produce to stay moist or to flush out irritants. Emotional tears contain significantly elevated concentrations of stress-related hormones, including cortisol, the body's primary stress chemical, as well as adrenocorticotropic hormone, which the brain releases during periods of intense psychological pressure. In other words, when you're under serious emotional or physiological stress, your body is actively producing and circulating chemicals that, at sustained high levels, damage cardiovascular health, suppress immune function, and disrupt sleep. And then you cry, and those chemicals leave your body through your tears. Dr. Frey described emotional crying as a form of biological self-regulation, a mechanism through which the body physically excretes the toxic byproducts of stress. People who cry easily are not drowning in emotion. They are, on a purely physiological level, cleaning house. Their bodies have an efficient, well-functioning release valve. The people who pride themselves on never crying are not storing strength. According to this research, they are storing cortisol. This also explains a paradox that every person who has ever had a genuine cry will recognize. You feel completely exhausted afterward, hollowed out, eyes swollen, and yet somehow lighter, clearer, as though a pressure that had been building for days has finally been released. That isn't poetry. That is your body completing a detoxification process it was designed to perform. Here is where psychology becomes genuinely fascinating, and where the cultural narrative about crying as weakness collapses entirely. The human autonomic nervous system operates across two primary modes. The sympathetic system drives a fight-or-flight response. Heart rate elevates, muscles tense, attention narrows, the body mobilizes for threat. The parasympathetic system runs in the opposite direction. It slows the heart, relaxes the muscles, and restores the body toward calm and recovery. Most people, when under emotional stress, remain locked in sympathetic activation for extended periods. The stress response fires but finds no resolution. The tension has nowhere to go. And over time, chronic sympathetic dominance is associated with anxiety disorders, hypertension, disrupted digestion, and impaired immune response. Crying interrupts this cycle in a measurable way. Research published in journals of psychophysiology has shown that while the beginning of a crying episode does initially escalate sympathetic activity, the racing heart, the heaving breath, the period following active crying shows a marked shift toward parasympathetic dominance. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens. The body reads the release of tears as a signal that the crisis has peaked and begins its recovery process. People who cry easily, therefore, are not people who are bad at managing their emotions. They are people who move through the full emotional cycle more rapidly and completely than those who suppress. They are not less regulated. They are more efficiently regulated. The distinction matters enormously because our culture has spent generations confusing emotional suppression with emotional strength, when the neuroscience increasingly suggests the opposite is true. One of the most striking characteristics of people who cry easily is that they often don't only cry about their own pain. They cry at films. They cry when a friend describes something difficult. They cry at news stories about strangers on the other side of the world. And this, to people who do not share the trait, can seem baffling or excessive. The explanation lies in a structure called the insula, a region of the cerebral cortex involved in bodily self-awareness and the processing of emotional experience. The insula plays a central role in what neuroscientists call interoception, the brain's ability to sense and interpret the internal physical states of the body. It is also critically involved in empathy, in the neurological process of mapping another person's emotional state onto your own body. In people with heightened emotional sensitivity, the insula tends to be more reactive when they witness another person's pain. Even a fictional character's pain, the insula generates a genuine internal physical response. The chest actually tightens. The throat actually constricts. This is not performance or imagination. It is the brain running an internal simulation of the other person's experience, and the body responding to that simulation as though it were real. This is why people who cry easily are so often the ones that strangers instinctively confide in. They are the friends people call at 2 a.m. They are the ones who notice, before anyone says a word, that something is wrong. Their nervous systems are tuned to frequencies of human experience that others simply do not receive as clearly. The same sensitivity that makes them cry at a film makes them extraordinary at genuine human connection. None of this is to suggest that crying easily is without its difficulties. Emotional sensitivity is a genuine double-edged experience, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Psychologists use the term emotional flooding to describe states in which emotional arousal overwhelms the brain's capacity for rational processing. When this happens regularly, sensitivity stops being an asset and begins to interfere with daily functioning. The goal, then, is not to suppress emotional sensitivity, which the research clearly shows is harmful, but to develop a working relationship with it, to be the one driving, not the one being driven. 3 practices are genuinely supported by psychological research in this area. First, somatic grounding, directing physical attention deliberately to a sensation in the body, such as pressing your feet into the floor or holding something cold, can interrupt emotional flooding by redirecting neural attention from limbic processing towards sensory processing. Second, affect labeling. The practice of naming the specific emotion you are experiencing has been shown in studies to reduce activity in the amygdala and decrease emotional intensity. Saying to yourself, "This is disappointment," or "This is grief," does not dismiss the emotion. It creates a small but meaningful distance between you and it. Third, scheduled emotional processing. Intentionally setting aside time to fully experience difficult emotions rather than carrying them suppressed through the entire day. Give sensitivity a container, a place to be fully expressed without overflowing into every other moment. Here is the truth that this entire conversation has been building toward. In a world that is becoming increasingly numb, increasingly mediated, increasingly defended behind screens and irony and emotional armor, the person who cries easily is carrying something rare and quietly extraordinary. They feel the world without a buffer. They register pain, their own and other people's, with honesty and immediacy. They cannot pretend things are fine when they aren't, and that inability to pretend, which looks like weakness to the defended, is actually one of the most courageous ways a person can move through life. Your tears are not evidence that you are broken. They are evidence that you are connected to yourself, to other people, to the full reality of human experience. They are your nervous system performing exactly the function it was designed to perform over hundreds of thousands of years of human history. Because it works. You are not too sensitive for this world. The world simply hasn't caught up to understanding what your sensitivity actually is.